welcome to my channel, Haylee Marie Vintage. Today I am so excited about the project I have for you. It is my annual Pride project because we have entered June, which is Pride month. I'm so excited. I've been thinking about this dress forever. Bought the fabric I think in December, so I'm really excited to finally get to cut into it, even though it's gonna make a big mess. But before we talk fabric, yes? Let's talk pattern. So this is Advance 7942. It has this cute slim cut skirt with a trumpet. This is not usually within my wheelhouse. I don't do close fitted things that often, but I just thought this would look so good in the fabric I have. So I'm gonna make it work. I am gonna do a mock-up first, which I will do off camera, but I will show you any fit adjustments I make accordingly. This dress is a very slim princess sheath, new curved front seams, low flounce of tiny unpressed pleats for trumpet silhouette. Flattering scoop neckline in front curves into deeper V in the back. Body and sleeves in one. Sleeve shirred, cut lower edge. Underarm gusset fitting. Center back zipper. Dress lined, has underflounce for perkiness. So that underflounce I actually don't have the fabric for. I'm gonna make a run probably right after lunch today to get 6 yards of netting. I didn't realize I needed netting for this dress, but I really want this dress to live to its true floof potential. So I'm going to do that. For the mock-up, I am going to need to make quite a few pattern adjustments, I think, because this is currently a size or two too small for me. So I'm gonna do some measuring. I'm gonna probably very, very incorrectly make this pattern just a smidge bigger. I need, I think, probably about 3 inches. And I need to check the hips. My biggest concern is around my hips. A lot of times, like, I need like an additional 8 to 10 inches. So we will figure that out. I'm gonna go a little off script on this pattern in general, but I'm gonna do my mock-up first before I finalize those decisions. Anyway, we have our fabric. I'm so excited to show you this. Well, we have our boring black lining. Not as exciting. This is just a Bemberg rayon. I'll link this down below. But the fabric is this beautiful, shimmery, fringy, striped piece. I have 6 1/4 yards of 45-inch wide fabric here, and it's so shiny. I feel like this isn't really capturing great on camera. Maybe if I do this side, but this fabric is really beautiful. However, it is going to get these little fringes everywhere in my apartment. They're going to get in my machine. It is going to be a whole thing. So I have not been vacuuming my apartment for 2 months. Unjustifiably. It's because I kept getting closer and closer to this project, and I'm like, there's no point in vacuuming before this project. And here we are. My floors are disgusting, but I will be doing a big vacuum after this. So bear with me. This is going to be quite a learning curve project. This fabric is honestly going to be quite nightmarish to use. All that said, I'm still really excited about trying it. I don't know. Maybe I'll fail, but I can't not try, especially with something this fantastic. But yeah, that's the project. And then, like last year in my Pride video, I kind of went over some different ways to be an ally to gay people. Those ones were very, very kind of like light. I know that a lot of you use my channel for escapism. I use my channel to escape too, but currently in America, queer rights are under attack, and it is really important to me to use this video to talk about that and talk about ways that you guys can help us, because queer kids are gonna die, and I just want a better future for them. I want them to live. The queer community is so full of lost loved ones because of society, and I don't want it to happen to the next generation. So it's gonna be like a little bit less light, but I really beg that you hear me out because this is so important to me, and if you enjoy the content I create, I just would appreciate you listening, but also taking action on a lot of the things that I ask you to do. I know it's really, really fun for Pride to like party and go out with all your queer friends, but we're not just a good time, we're actively fighting for our rights, and it's been a really, really, really scary last couple of years in this country. I do live in Seattle where I'm pretty protected for most of these things, but a lot of my queer friends do not. I want better for everybody. Better for the queer community is better for everybody. So I guess now I'm gonna hop into showing you the pattern scaling up that I'm doing. Please don't yell at me. It's my first time. I will take corrections, but don't be mean. Let's jump into it. Before jumping into the pattern, I wanted to show you what I found when I pulled the pattern out to iron it. It's clear that this owner decided they wanted a much higher neckline for this dress, so they added some additional tissue paper. Really glad they used pins instead of tape so I could undo it. And I am not gonna lie, I didn't keep these pieces because I have no interest in raising the neckline. One of the things I like about this dress is the neckline. And then before I'm doing anything else, which I will be tracing out the pattern, I'm first gonna go ahead and pin it so that way it is already shortened a little bit, so I won't have to do that again after tracing it. I already know that I'm gonna need to take a few inches off the hem, and then I'm also going to want to take about 1/4 to 1/2 inch out of the waist. This is just usually how things fit me the best. I don't always take the time to do these, but if I'm going to take the time to trace the pattern, I'm going to go ahead and do this up front. And then next up is tracing the pattern. So I've already traced and graded everything else, so I want to show you what I'm doing here. Ultimately, I need to add 2 to 3 inches to the waist and the hip. So I'm going to trace the pattern, and then I'm going to cut it on a line where I think that is grading it, and then I'm going to move that apart by, I think some of these I did a 1/2 inch, some I did a 1/4 inch. The 1/2 inch I did on the ones with the darts because I'm then going to actually extend the dart out by a 1/4 inch because that'll help, because my waist, like the expansion of my waist, needs to be a little bit smaller than the expansion of my hips and bust. So opening up the dart a little bit wider will help achieve that. So that is kind of what all is happening here. This I did without consulting YouTube again. I have watched tons of grading videos, and so I just assumed I could figure it out, and I didn't reference them back. It turned out okay. And I do want to note this tracing paper that I have is tracing paper I've had since I got my art degree in college. So I have no idea what brand it is, what type it is. It is just what I have had for the last, like, oh God, this makes me feel kind of old, but the last almost 10 years, because I got this when I was a freshman in college. So I have no advice on what type of tracing paper to get for you. It took a little bit of a learning curve on the grading to not get a wrinkly, ugly mess. So what I learned is to cut the strip out, to tape it down to one side, and then to figure out the distance in between using a ruler, and I marked that in multiple places. These still did end up kind of wrinkly, but they aren't as wrinkly as my early attempts. All right, bear with me on the audio quality. It's probably going to be kind of weird. So this is my mock-up. I've already done some kind of fitting stuff. I've pinched out a little bit from the bust up here. The shoulders are falling off. I can already tell I'm gonna need one of those like straps across the back. This is normal for a dress that is this deep backed for me. I just have a pretty slight back. I've already pinched out almost a whole 2 inches. I'll pinch out a little bit more in the back. And then I've also, I don't know if you can tell, but I've pinched up some on the front hip. I really just needed the room on the butt. That's looking pretty good. So I'll pinch the exact same amount out over here. As you can see, it's like this area that's just kind of like baggy and hanging here. But other than that, I'm pretty happy with the fit. The waist fits really nicely. So I have not a ton of complaints. So I'm going to real quick make these alterations. I'll show you how I do that and then how I apply them to the pattern, even though this is all me learning and rigging and just relying on all the years of sewing videos I've watched. But yeah, I'm pretty pleased with the fact that it scaled up this nicely and it only needs a couple tweaks. I kind of figured it's easier to go a little bit too big and pinch stuff out than it is to go too small and make things bigger. So that was the goal here. I accomplished that. I'm also going to need to shorten the sleeves. Even though they will be ruched up, the sleeves need to be a lot shorter because they're almost a full long sleeve on me. So that is what I'm going to do. I will catch you in a little. So after pinning my mock-up to be closer to how I want it to fit, I am then just basically using a ruler and marking things in the way that makes the most sense to me to be able to then transfer it to the other side. Obviously, ideally, you would be doing this using the pattern itself, but since we're already in fabric, I just have to try to get the measurements as close to possible as each other. So I use a couple points such as like how deep I go, and then a couple width points at different inch marks to replicate this then onto the other side. And then I'm drawing with my blue pen to make it so that way I can see these lines when I go to sew them, so that way everything is pretty smooth and effective. So then I'm taking those measurements and I am slashing and then kind of closing some of these areas. Again, this is not equaling the most beautiful looking pattern. I probably should retrace these incomplete if I end up making this pattern again. I'm moving this in and I'm slashing towards the middle to move it in because these points at the end are really important to match from piece to piece, and I don't want to mess that up. This again is probably like not technically the best way to do it, but this was the way that made sense in my brain. And then I'm just tapering that basically to like a finer point at the end, since I really only need it to come in around the neckline. I don't need it to come in anywhere else. And then once I have that all taped down, I'm going to tape in an additional piece of paper and then cut the neckline to be smooth with that weird like edge that I accidentally made from moving that piece in. Hopefully this all makes sense. And now it's finally time to cut these out. You do see these pieces like folded over, and that's because for the trumpet shaped dress as opposed to my mock-up, you stop much higher because then the ruffle gets attached to that. So that is why you see these big folds. This used way less lining than I expected, which was super nice. Always love conserving lining fabric since I will use them in many other projects. While this is slippery fabric and I could probably be more careful cutting it out because it's the lining, I am not gonna lie, I just don't care. So I'm just basically trying to cut it out as quick as possible and transfer all the markings and all that jazz. And now I am cutting out the striped like sparkly fabric. I knew this was going to be kind of a nightmare. One of the things I do want to do is try to match the stripes vaguely close, and then the other thing I need to do is this fabric has a clear nap because the fringe hangs one way, so I am trying to be good about making sure it is up, it's like the right way on the whole dress, otherwise it will definitely be really obvious and awkward. So that's what I'm doing. The fabric store cut this like kind of almost like up in the air, so you're cutting in between the fringes and not cutting the fringes off. I did not do that because my logic is I'm gonna have enough seam allowance that the fringe that I cut off shouldn't be like super obvious, I hope. I don't know if this was 100% the right method, but it's the method I went with. And then I was just cutting the fabric. This fabric made such a mess. I don't even know how to explain how coated my whole apartment was in sparkles and fringe and stuff. It was a lot. And here, since the panels are straight lines, I am using my rotary cutter and a guide. And again, I am trying my best to match my stripes so things won't look too crazy and uneven around the base of the ruffle. This was a lot of pieces. I think this was 8 pieces in total, and this was honestly what used most of my fabric. And then after I finished that up, which I did this between a bunch of different pieces, I then vacuumed. I vacuumed like all the time during this project to try to contain some of the tinsel from taking over my apartment. It was only moderately successful, but I'm sure it would have been way worse if I was not vacuuming while cutting the pieces. Basically, I cut a few pieces and then I vacuumed, and then I cut a few pieces and then I vacuumed, and that was how I operated, and it worked, I guess, well-ish enough. Morning. So we are the next day after my mock-up check-in. I have cut all my fabric. I'm about 5 hours into this project and have not sewn. 10 if you count the mock-up, which I'm still gonna put in a different time roundup because it will be wearable. But aside from yesterday being kind of like, I don't know, I'm feeling like in a funk about this project, and some of it is yesterday is the day. I do pre-film these just for accuracy. Maybe by the time this comes out, these bills will be repealed, but it is the day after Florida passed 4 bills against trans and queer people, and I'm just feeling kind of funky. It's been a really, really exhausting like last year or so for the queer community. I think we're at something like 500 bills passed against us in just this year. It's just, some days are hard. Some days you mourn for community, and your community. Like thank you, Spooky. I personally won't be impacted by these laws. I live in Washington, but I know what these laws mean to the people who live there. I know what it's like to be discriminated against because you're queer, and I know the lives this is gonna take of our queer family. Trans and queer people are just right now being made out to be these big, bad, scary people, and we're not. We don't want to indoctrinate your children. We just want, the only involvement we want with your children is if they find out that they're queer, trans, having a role model to look up to who shows you like life isn't so bad and there's a lot of joy and beautiful things about being queer, and you can still do what you want. Because a lot of us didn't necessarily get that because of the AIDS epidemic, and we didn't always get people to look up to, or just like people were quieter about being queer in the past. I don't know, I'm just having kind of like a lot of thoughts today. I'm feeling funky today. It does still feel like a good day to sew. Sewing's good for my mental health, but I'm just feeling really tired. And this is what I'm talking about when, like, if you're gonna go out and party with us during Pride, you better, if you live in these states, be calling your senators, be writing letters, donating to campaigns of people who are gonna run against these people, looking into your local mutual aid. I plan on later today looking at some different mutual aids that I can donate to trans people in Florida through. I prefer personally mutual aid. I don't really care what the individual who gets my money does with it. I'm not giving it to them to feel better about myself. I genuinely actually want to help, and I know how much money makes a difference in that. So I will try to find some different maybe mutual aid groups or things to link down below. I will definitely be linking some nonprofits and things to donate. There's all sorts of different tricks you can use. If it's not financial, there are free things. And if you can't talk on the phone to people because you get super anxious like me, you can always write letters. I tend to go physical letter route because a physical letter just is more than an email. I guess that does technically cost money. So you can go go email route. But yeah, no, I'm just feeling tired today. This little meltdown is like the third or fourth I've had. Yeah, it's been a hard year. I've watched many of my queer friends, even those married, have to go through lawyers to make sure they have everything as shored up as possible in case for some reason their marriage is in question or they're in a state that doesn't acknowledge their marriage. They can still make like medical decisions for their partners, and this is just something straight people don't have to go through. It's not fun. And like also on this, like last year when I did my Pride video, I lost a bunch of followers. I expect to lose a bunch of followers this year. It's the way it is. My art is queer. I am queer, and like you can't separate my queerness from my art. I feel free, I think, to do the things that I do because I'm queer, because I'm really comfortable in my identity. And one of the biggest reasons I live in Seattle is because it's a pretty overall safe place. I've still encountered quite a bit of homophobia here. I have been denied for jobs here because I'm queer and there's a morality clause that I won't sign. I guess it's that sometimes I'm just exhausted because straight people seem to somehow think sometimes that queer people are not still under attack, and we very much are. And like similar to this, like when I posted, I think my year in review video, I talked about like how disheartening it was to lose a bunch of followers over like talking about pride and my like I guess like my sexuality, and somebody commented and they were like, well, like I don't want to hear about anybody's sex life. I'm like, my video was talking about ways to be an ally. I don't want to talk about my sex life either. I want all of you to stay well away from my bedroom. Like, just straight people are often like, well, it probably wasn't because you were gay. It was like, and I'm like, if it's me talking about queer allyship, it probably is because I'm gay. And so like, I just want to like preemptive, if you're going to be rude or if you're going to make a comment like that down below, I am going to block you. I actually block people quite often for being rude. This is my space on the internet. It gets to be what I want, and what I want is block people who are rude. Sorry, this is like a longer check-in than usual. I just had these things on my mind as I'm working on a dress about queer joy and pride and being who I am. I just kind of felt the need to word vomit this all out. But now we are gonna hop, hi spooky, back into the sewing. I'm pretty excited today. I'm hoping, my goal for today is basically to get the main dress done, and my goal for tomorrow will just be ruffle focused. Oh, you being the sweetest. She knows I'm in a funk. She's been a very good cat today. Yes, you have. But yeah, hoping, I guess, to sew my way out of this funk, as well as find some action items to do today to help my queer and trans family. So that's what I am up to today, and we shall hop to it. All right, we are starting out as always with darts. I'm a little trepidatious about working with this fabric. I was going to give a shot and see if my pen would give me enough mark to see. It definitely didn't, so I stuck with my chalk one. Overall, marking this fabric was very challenging because it's basically a bunch of like tiny reflective pieces of plastic all sewn or woven together. This was a bit of a challenge, but I did get it going. I decided that like this Choco pencil that I'll use on slick fabrics was the best way to go for marking in between my points. And then after marking, I'm of course pinning those together before seeing how this fabric ends up sewing. With my first time sewing with this fabric, which I realize in retrospect should have been on a scrap, but it was actually quite fine and sewed mostly like normal fabric. So I was pleasantly surprised by this. It also pressed pretty well. What I would say is if you had it too hot, it would kind of curl the ends, but I only ever really pressed on the wrong side for that reason, because otherwise, yeah, the fringe would just kind of curl and get weird, which makes total sense. That I did do on a test piece before. And then I'm using my lint roller regularly while ironing to try to, again, keep the sparkle limit and not as much everywhere in my apartment. Again, not that successful, but I'm sure it was better than if I didn't. And then next up was doing the gussets. I'm already familiar with doing gussets, but I don't know if I've done them on camera before. Basically, these are triangles that give you more movement. So here what I'm first doing is I am marking that. I guess I decided to roguely go back to my pencil as my best marking. These are in the armpit. I'm also going to do this in the black lining and show you that because it might be clearer when we start to look at like how these fold over and stuff like that. But after chasing my lines, I'm going to go ahead and cut up that middle line. This is always nerve-wracking, but it's going to be okay. And then after that, I'm taking my lint roller to get the fringe that I just cut up cleaned up. And then after that, I will be going in with my iron and pressing those edges back, following the like lines that I drew as the pressing line. And then once you do that, you're seeing me pin basically this triangle shape in. I did have to custom draft this. The gusset that came with this pattern was no longer in the envelope, so I went ahead ahead and just kind of made up my own and hoped for the best. They worked out fine, lucky for me. That is what I'm doing here, is I am just basically getting that triangle piece all pinned and ready for me to then top stitch down. And again, I'm doing the exact same thing with the other pieces. And then I'm just top stitching that down as close to the edge as I can get. I also thought I'd show you top stitching the sparkle. You can't really see what's going on, but honestly, I was doing this mostly by touch because with the way the fringes were, it was pretty hard to see where exactly I was sewing. So it's hard for you to see, but it's also hard for me to see. And then the stitching kind of traps the fringe in it. So what I'm doing here is I'm using a pin and just kind of like pulling out those fringy bits. This is just because I'm intense. I don't think you would necessarily have to do this, but I did not like how the fringe looked like tangled up in the seams. So I went ahead and picked that out. My camera did have a really hard time focusing on this, which makes sense, but that is what I'm doing, and I could do it pretty quickly with a pin, so it wasn't too bad. And with the gussets in, it's now time to pin these together and sew everything together. I'm pretty excited. This has not been that challenging so far, famous last words. And I don't know, I just love this fabric. I love looking at this fabric, so I'm excited. And then after I finish pinning those edges, I'm going ahead and I am, of course, sewing down the edge with the usual seam allowance. Since these are like going vertically with the threads like the same direction, they're parallel, I didn't feel the need to pick out the individual fringes from the seam allowance, which was nice. And then I am pressing those seams open. This was a very strange process. I tried to make sure I was only ever pressing in like the direction of the fringe for the most part. So like going with that flow, I don't quite know how to explain it, but hopefully you're getting the picture visually here. That was just, I don't know if it's the right way to handle this fabric, but it's the way I did it. And then after handling the most difficult one first, I went back and did the lining, which felt kind of easy, except for this fabric is very shifty because it is a rayon. And then here I am pinning the lining to the sparkly, beautiful outer fabric. I do want to note here that I'm also pinning down the full length of the zipper. I left the zipper line in the back open. This is not a pattern instruction. Actually, a lot of this is me going off pattern instruction because the pattern has you flatlining it, which I knew I did not want this tinsel fabric touching my skin at all. So I went ahead and went with like a more, I guess, is this a bag lining or something like that? Because I knew this was what would work better with the fabric. I think flat lining makes total sense if your fabric is not itchy and scratchy and kind of a nightmare. Here you get weird lighting and spooky blocking of my camera, but what I'm doing is I am sewing that lining in. This is really, really straightforward and nothing complicated. And then I was worried about the neckline not being stiff enough, and I didn't want to use normal interfacing because I don't have any black interfacing, and I thought white interfacing would be like too obvious because the fabric is kind of sheer. So I went ahead and I just used some black netting scraps I had left over from a dress that I hemmed a few years ago. So that's what I'm doing here, is I am just sewing that in kind of as some extra structure and interfacing. I don't know how well this worked, but I felt like it was worth a try. And then after sewing that, I'm of course pressing everything. I also understitched. I want to make sure to mention that. Understitching is very important for getting things to turn out a little bit nicer. This was overall pretty fiddly to work with. I mean, none of these fabrics press particularly well. The black rayon fabric is perhaps the best at being pressed, but still not great. But I'm quite pleased because this was challenging, and I don't know, I always feel I like trying new things, and trying this fabric was definitely trying a new thing, and I'm very happy with it. And it is so hard to tell what I'm doing with this fabric because it's sparkly and going everywhere, but I am sewing in my zip right now, so I have gone down and now I'm going up and around to have that zip put in. It was important again to me to have the lining covering everything, so that's why it's like a nice finished edge that the zip is going on. I'm quite pleased with this zipper because this was not a fun material to work with. I've just gotten so much better at zippers that I don't feel like procrastinating putting them in. I like to get it over with because I know it will ultimately be okay. Sorry, this like is not clear at all what I'm doing because this fabric is so beautiful. And then a huge shout out to my subscriber Jennifer, who sent me a ton of metal zips that saved my butt on this project. project because I did not have a black metal zip in the right length, but I found one in your box. And I'm now working with so much fabric. I should have put this in much sooner, but what I'm doing is I'm sewing in my little spooky label. All right, hello, we're here for another check-in. It is almost 3 o'clock the next day. I've done a couple things to help ground myself and just feel a little bit better. I think it's really important when world events going on that are very distressing to ground yourself in your community. Just remember that not everybody's terrible. So that's what I did yesterday. I went to a sewing meetup with a fabric swap and pattern swap. Today I went garage sailing, so we're gonna do a quick little mini haul. From the sewing swap, I got this beautiful wool. It's a really nice soft gray wool that I'm gonna use for a vest. There's not that much of it. And then I also got this kind of beige, what feels like a rayon lining fabric. And then garage sailing for $10, I got a new tripod. A lot of my tripods are kind of janky because this is actually the first tripod I've bought. The tripod my camera is currently on is my great-grandfather's. The other tripod I regularly use is my dad's. And then this is my new one, which is also fairly old, but I just think old tripods are nice. And yeah, it was only 10 bucks. And then I got a bunch of vintage linens for, I think this was like $7. I'm looking to try some ice dyeing, and these will be perfect for that. I want a bunch of ice dyed napkins because I want to start using cloth napkins. And I got a couple of vintage patterns. I have an apron one and a nightgown one. These were $1 each, so I kind of figured why not. And I got some ribbon. I spent $20 on all of that at the garage sale, and then the fabric was free, so that's my little cheapo haul. The other thing I've been doing is I Think So You're Wrong About. I'll link it down below, but I've been enjoying, I'm listening, it's about 2 hours. It talks about the New York Times and kind of their transphobia, and I actually think it's a really effective podcast for talking about some of the different rhetoric people use against the trans community and how like subtle and insidious sometimes transphobia can be. So I think it's a great listen. I will put that down below. I think right now we are already seeing trans people be denied healthcare, and so it is time to educate ourselves on transphobia as well as do what we can to support them through mutual aid, giving them places to stay in states that they can get care in, but also just like make sure you're using their correct names and pronouns. This is something that I want to make sure to cover. I was not so good at names and pronouns early on in my, I guess, queer journey, for lack of a better term. And so a trick I learned is you just have to practice when they're not there. So when I have had friends come out with a name change or pronoun change, one of the things I do is I practice talking about them to Spooky. I will just say their name and their pronouns over and over again, talking about them like once or twice a day while talking to my cat, and then I am more likely to make mistakes while talking to Spooky than I am when I talk to them. So that's just always a tip I like to give people, especially if you're like new to they them pronouns, or someone you've known their whole life has changed their name. It's really important to affirm them in their pronouns and their name. Practicing when they're not around is perfect for that. And it does take practice. It's okay to like not get it right 100% of the time, but you need to put in your best effort, and that means practicing sometimes. I put in my best effort on a lot of different things, and almost nothing comes without practice. I've had to practice to learn to sew, and not that pronouns are like sewing, but you have to practice to get pronouns right. And if I ever find myself like kind of going backward in a relationship with a friend where all of a sudden either their dead name's coming up or I'm using the incorrect pronouns, I will then spend again the week talking to Spooky about my friend using the correct pronouns and the correct name. That is just a really hopefully helpful tip for y'all, because we need to look out for our trans friends. And it's okay if you don't know a trans person and you meet a trans or non-binary person, and there is stuff to learn. Just there's spaces to learn that aren't as harmful, and so instead of misgendering them to their face, misgender them to your cat while you're learning to gender them properly. I feel like a lot of cis people don't get it, but like using correct pronouns and names is life-saving. And like I really want to emphasize that it is so important. And yeah, practice with your cats, practice with your dogs, talk to your plants, tell your plants about your friend. And it's just a really great way to get in that gender affirming things that you can do for your friend. That is, I guess, weird little rant number 2. This is going to be my last check-in for this dress. I probably am not going to finish today because it is 3 o'clock. I don't feel like, hi Spooky. Yeah. Have you heard all about a couple of my friends? So this is my dress. It's looking really, really good. I'm so happy I did the lining the way I did, and I took that risk because This dress feels so good on because the lining is really nice, and I love the way this fabric looks. I don't love how it feels. So what I have to finish up today is I have to cut the netting for the ruffle, then I have to pleat the ruffle, install the netting, install the ruffle, and then the other thing I have to figure out is the sleeves. So last night I did a quick ruching attempt like the pattern directs, and I absolutely hated it. So I need to try this on and figure out where I want to cut the sleeves, because I think I just want this to be like a normal, boring, short sleeve top. There's already gonna be so much going on the bottom. Right now what I'm trying to figure out is if I want to get the bottom on so I can figure out what I want to do with the sleeves, or if it makes more sense to do the sleeves now because I don't have a big ruffle on the bottom. So I haven't decided which I'm going to do first. Huh, spooky. I'm feeling really excited. I'm feeling so much better because, like I said, again, rooting in your community is so important during hard times. All of me, like, I almost skipped the sewing event last night, and then I was like, you know, you'll feel better if you go, and I went. I'm not a very spontaneous person. I know that is probably shocking given the fact it's mid-May and I'm filming my project for mid-June. Not spontaneous. Spontaneously going yard sailing and seeing all these people out in the sunshine and chatting and, you know, living life was just really, really good for my mental health during a time where I've been pretty distressed. So yeah, again, remember to stay rooted in your community, but while you root in your community, also still make sure you are doing actions to help with the issues that are troubling you. Are you ready to hop into sewing, Spooky? You seem kind of hyper for sewing right now. So yeah, we're gonna hop to it. And of course I put off until now to start cutting the tulle. I needed to cut double the pieces, so there were 16 pieces of tulle to gather it down into the skirt. I used a few different tricks while trying to mark what each of these pieces were with tulle. It's really hard to tell by just notches. And also I only had enough for one of this J pattern piece, but I figured it would be okay and I could supplement it with other stuff, and it wasn't worth making another trip to the fabric store. And once I read the directions again and saw I needed to have 4 of each piece, I went ahead and quadrupled this up instead of just doubling it. And again, I'm just using my rotary cutter for this. I don't know if scissors would have been faster, but I felt like a rotary cutter would be neater. It was also a pretty hot day when I cut this out, so I was very sweaty and very not happy by the time I got to the end of this. And once I'm ready to sew, the first thing I'm doing is I am pinning all of the different panels of the sparkly fabric together. Again, this is 8 panels, and I'm just matching markings and things like that. So I am sewing all of that at once, just seam after seam after seam. And then, of course, I am pressing things open. And because the tulle is 16 pieces instead of 8, I'm working on it long after I finished all the panels for the sparkly fabric. Tulle is very confusing to work with. I do not particularly enjoy it. Here you see me pinning things together and just kind of stacking them up. I'm stacking everything up because I'm making sure that nothing's getting twisted, because when you have 16 pieces, it's really easy to accidentally twist your fabric. So the reason I'm kind of laying these out this way is so that way I can tell that they're all like folding down flat and there's nowhere where it's getting twisted, because that will be a headache to then unpick and refigure out. And with the tulle finally done, I am now putting in the gathering stitch. This one I'm doing 2 lines. Usually I do 3, but I went with 2 because it's a structural layer. And the way I stopped this is I stopped this according to the part of the skirt they would like result in. So there's a gap in the center back, there's a gap in the difference between the side back and the side front, and then there is also the whole front is stopped again in the center front, so that way I have quadrants to work with because this is so much tulle and it's really important to keep track of it. Also, anytime you see my pink cloud stitch marker that is usually used for crochet, that is to mark the center front. These are just all tricks that I'm using to try to keep tails of where exactly my tulle is, and so that way when I put it together everything makes sense, because I am tracking again 16 pieces. And the last thing that I'm finishing for today is pleating. I do this by basically measuring by inches and doing it the exact same like inch depth all the way around. These are definitely not the most even pleats in the world, however they do the trick and they match really well with the pieces that are left. I do just like a lot of on the fly measuring in this while I'm working on it, and I'm very, very proud of these pleats. I am not known for being particularly good at reading and doing pleats, and so I'm so proud of the way these ended up. The other thing I had to do is I had to make sure to keep things really marked on where my seams were again, because once these were pleated, the seams weren't always visible. So lots of things I feel like I'm tracking and marking on this one, but this is all I'm doing for the rest of today, and then we will hop back into sewing tomorrow. So here's the stitch marker I mentioned, and then the binder clip you see here also marks the front of the flounce, so I'm making sure those two match before then starting to gather my tulle down to make sure it fits every single section. This was a lot of work and took just like a lot of like mental energy to keep everything tracked, but I did it and I'm really proud of myself because definitely when I was a newer sewer, I wouldn't have known that this was something I would need to track so carefully. And then here I'm real quick basting those two layers together, the fringe and the netting, and after that we can get ready to attach it to our skirt. I am getting so excited at this point. Again, I'm using my stitch marker to find the center front, and then I am pinning this all the way around. It fits perfectly, which for how many pleats this was, I'm so happy that I pleated it to perfectly fit into the gap, especially since I had to do a little bit of extra math because of the widening I had done, adding that 3 inches to basically the bottom hem. I then had to make sure that was accounted for in my pleats, and I'm so proud of myself. I'm just elated in like my skills and how much they've grown, because this was definitely not something I could have tackled probably even 6 months ago. And finally, I am stitching that all together. And then I went back and forth a gajillion times on how I wanted to hem the skirt. And the way I ended up going was with like a hemming tape method, because I was trying to figure out basically how to cover my raw edges and press them in and not have that fringy part like brushing on my skin, because I thought it would be pretty uncomfortable. So first what I'm doing is I am basically top stitching this tape around the bottom of the hem to cover that edge. And then I could not bear the thought of hand stitching around this because it's such a giant piece of fabric. So I'm then top stitching it down from the underside with the fold, so that way then this hem is finished. And then I'm sewing over the lining over the top bits where the gathers are so that doesn't scratch against my skin. I'm pretty pleased this turned out to not be a sensory nightmare to wear, which I was pretty concerned about, but all the little details I put in made it so this was not a nightmare to have against my body. And then my last step was going around the whole hem and pulling out the bits of fringe that got stuck in that top stitch, so that way it would not be as obvious that there was a big top stitch there. While I don't love the top stitch finish that was there, I do think it was worth the time and pain it saved my hands. And honestly, picking out the fringe like this was kind of fun. It was just something a little bit different. A different type of tediousness than hand sewing. My last step was the sleeves. I did do the gathered sleeves on these and I absolutely hated them. I just wanted them to be simple short sleeves. I just felt like there was too much going on in the dress if I left the sleeves the way they were. So I cut the first one and then I laid it on top of the second one and cut it on that exact same line. This worked out great and I'm so happy that I altered these sleeves for the way I want. This dress is now so much more both comfortable but also to me visually pleasing. And then after pressing that edge over, I am now pinning them together to be hand stitched down. Again, it's important to me to make sure almost none of the sparkly fringy bits are touching my skin. So here I am pinning them so that way I can then hand stitch the hem down so it won't touch my skin. And here we have a sleepy little Spooky. She loves to snuggle me while I sew, snuggling me while I quickly finish the last bit of hand stitching around these arm holes before showing you the reveal. I adore this dress. I can't wait for you to see it. I am so proud of it, and I am just so proud of who I am. And with that, let's go ahead and hop into the reveal. that, you've seen the reveal. I hope you enjoyed it. I feel like the background worked better on picture than camera, but it happens. Sometimes with my filming camera, it's a little bit hard to get everything framed correctly, but hopefully you enjoyed it nonetheless. Before I go into my cost breakdown or final thoughts on this project, I'm first gonna share the org that I found to donate to. I'm going to link them down below. They're the Transgender Law Center, and they basically specialize in policy and law for transgender people. I chose them for a bunch of reasons. Like I said, I'm kind of iffy on 501c3 nonprofits for various reasons, but one of the reasons I chose them is they're actually trans-led. It seems like they put Black trans women on the forefront of their initiatives, and I went through and I looked at their job listings, and it looks like they're paying people the appropriate wage for the labor they're asking for, as well as actually given benefits. A lot of my issues with nonprofit come from having friends that work for nonprofits, where the nonprofit makes the world a better place but doesn't pay them a living wage or give them health benefits. So that is just always something I'm a little bit wary of when donating to nonprofits. So this one checked a bunch of boxes. I'll be donating to them this month, and I think they would be great if you can't find any local mutual aid groups to give to. Now that we have talked about that, we can real quick hop into my spreadsheet, my budget, how much this cost. Not my budget, because a budget would say I was limiting how much it cost, and I did not do that well here. So our total for a fabric is $199.77. This is not shocking. The sparkly tinsely fabric was $141.98. If I recall, this was around $28 a yard. And then the lining was $45.86. I wanted to get a pretty nice quality lining since I bought nice quality fabric, and the lining is ultimately what touches my skin. And then the 6 yards of tulle were $12. The reason I went with tulle over netting is it was $12 for 6 yards, and the netting I think would have been like $8 a yard. So it would 1.5 yards would have been more than all 6 yards. So that is why I made that decision. As far as notions, I spent $6.41. I bought 3 spools of thread for this, a zipper, and then hook and eye. What is the other 62 cents? Oh, and then the binding tape that I used for the hem. So those are what I used for notions. And then the pattern was $19.82. I actually can't believe that it was that cheap. That seems really cheap for a pattern like this, but I'll happily take it. Oh, and I never got to my supplies total. I keep doing that where I forget to give you a supply total. So I spent $226 on this dress even. Wow, amazing. I'm more than happy with that. I think this looks like a designer dress. The fabric is really, really high end and not something you could probably find in anything besides a designer store. So I think that's great. The labor, this took me 19 hours and 45 minutes. If I did not need to grade this pattern, that would have cut, I think, about an hour of time off, and it would have been really nice. However, I do really, really like how this worked and how it fits. So the grading was worth it, and I'm glad I did it. But this is pretty hefty. I think my coat was slightly more hours this year, but this I think is coming in second for most hours spent this year. I think that's just between basically making 2 dresses, because I made the outside and the lining. It did not have directions to line it initially the way I did. I just knew I didn't want the tinsel fabric touching me in any way, shape, or form. I should have, I feel like, put in the 2 hours it took for me to vacuum all of it from the apartment. This was an intense dress, and also the hem, it took me a really long time. I am not experienced with pleating, so that took a while, as did just lots of other things about the dress. But as always, I multiply that by $32.70, which is a living wage here in Seattle. I calculate living wage by basically not living paycheck to paycheck and having a little extra money for either luxuries or saving. And so that brings us to labor total of $645.83, which is a lot of money, but this took a lot of labor. So that would bring me to a grand total of $871.83 for the total cost of this dress, including labor. Given the fact I feel like this feels like a designer quality, I think that is totally fine. But let's now hop into the dress itself. I keep thinking I've seen the hot glue trick, and I don't know how well it works for having this part be a little bit sticky, but this is the dress. It is stunning. I love it. When I wear it, I feel pretty, and more important than just feeling pretty, I feel comfortable. So you guys do not see this silhouette often from me here on my channel where it hugs my curves, specifically my booty, as much, because I just have a harder time with things fitting. I do usually have to grade or do various things because my hip, but let's be honest, notice my butt to waist ratio is not what these patterns are made for. So often I don't do it, and I also don't always like the look of it. I'm not a butt emphasizer for myself. I notice people look at it in public and it makes me uncomfy, so I like gathered dresses that hide it. I do not want to be perceived. I do not want my butt to be perceived. So you do not see this style from me often, but I'm so pleased. This fits really comfortable. I have a lot of problems with, if I am wearing this style of dress, it kind of like tugging on the hips in like a very uncomfortable way. A lot of times it limits my mobility. This does none of that. And I'm so pleased with the trumpet skirt. I'm not gonna lie, this pleating's a little bit janky. I lost some of my patience and I just assumed because the fabric is the fabric it is, you would not be able to tell that my pleating's uneven. I think that probably worked out well for me. This was a good lesson for me to start learning to pleat again. I've been avoiding pleats for most of my sewing career. Very early in my sewing, I did something with pleats and it turned out disastrously. I believe it was off camera, but I'll double check, and if there is a video for it, I'll link it. But ever since then, I've kind of had this weird, bizarre fear of pleats that I think maybe I'm starting to get over, which I'm excited about. I love this dress. I will also note this dress does not shed now that it's made. It shed a ton because I was cutting it and messing with it and all that jazz. But now that it is made and done, it is not doing that anymore, which is fantastic because the vacuuming for this project was insane. I did not enjoy. I had to vacuum, 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 and vacuum. I love this dress. It makes me happy. I can't wait to wear it to some gay theater this month for Pride. But with that, I'm going to wrap up this video. Remember, if you celebrate Pride and you're straight, or I guess not trans in general, remember that we need to protect our trans siblings this Pride season as well as this year. It's been a really, really hard year legislative, and just continue to take care of the trans people in your community. And with that, I am going to say goodbye. As always, you can support me by giving me a tip on Ko-Fi, although this month I would really rather you donate to a trans cause. And then other than that, you can always give this a thumbs up, comment down below, let me know what you think. And other than that, I will see you next time. I post every single Friday at 8 a.m. Pacific time, so I will see you then. Bye!